Let me make sure. Bam, we are live. Welcome, everybody. We got a great show tonight. We're here with the Antidote. We got Professor Nolan Cabrera with us. We're also trying to make sure we got Instagram live. You know, sometimes I was doing TikTok, and I think I got a too young of a TikTok is too young. I'm an older head. If I could be on Facebook, I would, but I get made fun of. So we're gonna try IG live today. Thank you for being here. We should be letting people know. We'll give people some time to come on in to the room. Man, what a time to be alive. I keep reminding myself that this morning I was driving, stuck in traffic down here in Atlanta, and Fear Not of Man came on, the classic off the Most Def classic, Black on Both Sides. And it just reminded me, right? Like we are all we got. And so thank you for being here. This is the Antidote. This is where we are gonna dive into what's happening in the world, the most pressing issues, the things that folks aren't talking about in a way that feels like we could find some common ground and some solution. We don't shy away from those, and we look for ways to connect and to move forward in a way that results in more connection and more connection. What's up, Anika? Thanks for being here. That's the amazing Anika Naila. We're gonna let folks jump in. I'm gonna invite my brother to join us here in a second. You know, sometimes it takes a minute for YouTube and IG to catch up to us. So make sure you're invited. Make sure you like this. Tell the algorithm that you care about real conversations, searching for connection, all that good stuff. All right. Yeah. Thank you. Let's go ahead. I'm gonna bring Nolan on, and we're gonna chop it up. We're gonna have a great conversation today. You know, we did not script this. This is gonna be an organic conversation. And we'll see where it goes. I'm super excited. Got a lot of respect for this brother. I knew about him, knew about his work around ethnic studies down in Arizona, and through a mutual connection, shout out to Jamaica, we got connected, and it's been wonderful to connect with him on so many levels, and I'm super excited to invite him to the Antidote now. So without further ado, that's the word I'm looking for. Without further ado, Professor Nolan Cabrera. What's up, brother?
Hey, so
doing well. Thanks for being here, man.
Of course, man. Greeting from 3,000 miles away, bro.
Technology is a wonderful thing, ain't it?
It can be. It drives me nuts too, because being an old head, like you said, we're kind of like, how do I figure this out?
Man, you should have seen me trying to figure out how to stream like this. It was just not. It is a real thing. Look, I'm doing my own production here too, so I'm like, we're gonna get this ticker going. Look, welcome to the Antidote. I can't tell you how long. This is the first time I'm got this and the logo in the corner. Old heads. We can't even do it. Yeah, man. So why don't you, for folks who might not know who you are, what you do, why don't we start with that? Why don't you share a little bit about your journey?
Sure. So right now I'm a full professor at the University of Arizona, and my academic work centers around issues of whiteness, specifically in higher education institutions. So I wrote 2 books about that, White Guys on Campus and Whiteness in the Ivory Tower. But then at the same time that I became a professor, that's when the state of Arizona banned Mexican American studies at the Tucson Unified School District. And that was basically a precursor to all the bannings of critical race theory, DEI. It's like the same blueprint that you see right now. And so I was part of both the grassroots and legal resistance, both being a community member, a faculty member, as well as an expert witness on the case that overturned that racist law that said that teaching Mexican American studies to Mexican American students was in fact illegal. And what's weird is I find myself nowadays kind of like a, a racist Groundhog Day, where like I wake up and I'm like, I've seen this script before, right? I've heard, like Trump right now saying about, DEI is illegal. That's exactly what Tom Horn would say about Mexican American studies. It teaches to hate white people. It teaches to hate Western values. It teaches to hate America, which is ironic because last time I heard, freedom of speech is supposed to be a cherished American ideal, and they're the ones that are actually engaging in said censorship, engaging in said repression, under the guise of, well, this is really what America's all about. And then that gets to a whole different level about how deeply is racism embedded in society that the very people who try to uproot it say that that is actually anti-American. So I've been, a writer, a thinker, a speaker. Sorry, I would be my rep would kill me if I didn't say this. I'm represented by Speak Out. If folks want me to come to the campuses, I'm sorry, I got to do it.
Oh, listen, I'm trying to get to that level. I'm trying to get to the level where I get rep by somebody that I got to shout out. So you're showing me how to do it, brother.
There we go. So I do all these things that do, and now, work on racism, anti-racism, racial justice, and that's really what I've been about for the last, you said full heads. Been doing it for about 20 years now. So yeah, that's what's up. Oh, and the book that just dropped is called Banned, about the so this just came out early this year, about the struggle around Mexican American studies. And the cool thing, it's weird because this cat right here, Bob Chang, he was one of the lawyers in the case, and so you got this weird thing where, like, I'm on the grassroots level in Tucson, all the struggles that are going on there, and I'm writing from that. And he's like, so we created this legal theory, and this is what you need to do to challenge the state. So it actually reads almost like two different books, but it's two different playbooks.
Okay. So you said a couple things that I think, there's a couple things that you said that are examples of sort of this larger topic I want us to touch on. You said, like, you've seen this before. And I think that that's really important for us to name, because right now I think the overwhelming narrative is that this is unprecedented, right? That these things are unprecedented. And the reality is, and it's not to, I don't say that to minimize what's happening right now or how egregious what's happening right now is. It certainly is. And I think about Dr. Eddie Glaude, right? Like, this is us. This is who America has always been, right? And so you bring up, I remember that, right? I remember when Arizona was banning ethnic studies. As a matter of fact, my partner at the time wrote her grad school, like, seminar capstone paper on that, because she's originally from Arizona. And so we were, like, in there, right? Like, we were in there. But it's funny how it's not just what's happening around truth telling that we've seen before. The truth telling at that time, what was that? It was HB like 1081 or something like that, right? Or
2281. Yep, that's right.
2281. Yeah, that was the banning of ethnic studies. But the other piece of that got, I would argue, more attention nationally was HB 1070, which was about giving local police the authority to enforce immigration, right? And so it seems like the playbook is we're gonna generate and manufacture this fear of the other, right? Immigration and xenophobia to justify a restructuring of or a reassertion of whiteness.
Exactly.
Right, particularly the story of whiteness.
Exactly.
And so I'm hoping you can, and we got a question in the chat here. I don't know if you can see, but what was HB 1070? So if you could talk just about a little bit of that, that'd be great.
Of course. So HB 1070 did exactly what Ryan said. It didn't just deputize local law enforcement into enforcing immigration law. Which, by the way, can I go on a quick tangent on this one?
Hey, this is yes, please.
Okay. So like a lot of times I hear cats who say, like, what's wrong with that? Why shouldn't it's law enforcement? Shouldn't it just be around, And if you take the time, which I have, right, talk to anyone who actually cares about law enforcement. Talk to a cop who, because all this nonsense of like, Jack Bauer, I have 24 hours, I got to kick in a door and shoot someone in the leg to get this information, right? Like they always told me, and I know it's a silly example, but they always said, look to the wire, right? And they always said that you're only as good as your informants. Your police work is only as good as your informants. Otherwise, you're not doing any real policing. And we can get into like the politics of policing, all this stuff. I want to put that aside for a second, not entirely, but the point is that if you have a community of brown folks, especially ones of mixed status households, they're not going to talk to you about crime in the community, because if I talk to you, I could get deported, or my tío could get deported, or my abuela could get deported. So you cut off all of your supply of information to do law enforcement. So even from the perspective of people who are police officers, they say if they're really committed to their job and not just trying to puff out in John Wayne, which a lot of them are.
Right.
But if even from their perspective, they say that that's a stupid way of doing law enforcement, because you cut off all other. It's like to get this one crime taken care of. It'd be like if you put all of your eggs in the basket of like shoplifting, and you said in order to deal with shoplifting, I'm not going to deal with murder, rape, sexual assault, like any of that stuff. So
right.
Backing up, HB 1070, it criminalized. Well, it was just the most draconian immigration law that was on the books, and it basically allowed legalized racial profiling, because it just said, and it said, our governor at the time said, they said, well, how are you going to know? Like, how is Joe Schmo law enforcement going to know who's undocumented? And she couldn't answer the question except for alluding to basically racially profiling based upon different.
Right. If they're brown and if their last name is Rodriguez or something like that.
Exactly. It's but that's the point, is that you don't have the wherewithal to do that, and so you're going to end up doing what's happening right now, which is you start picking up people who have papers, who don't. And what was weird, and about this, having connections to Arizona, there was such a culture of fear that, like, just think about something basic. Like I would talk to students at the U of A, University of Arizona, and they'd say, like, if you're brown and you're going to go play a game of pickup basketball, right? Sometimes you just, you're in your gym shorts. You don't want to be running around with your wallet, After HB 1070 happened, you understood that you were guilty until proven innocent. All of their family members, like, it's common, that cats go to, they'll go to, finish a day at work, go to the bar with the homies, unwind, all this stuff. No, nothing. It all died. It all died out. And then you saw businesses crumbling as a result, because their usual clientele backed out. And there's just this culture of fear. And basically they ended up saying it was just legalized racial profiling. It's the only way that they could enforce it. And every few years in the cycles, this is what happens, is that you get this, and actually right now is a great example of it. Isn't it just an incredible coincidence that just during a presidential election, we just happen to have an immigration crisis? Like, it's just mind-blowing how, and you know what? 4 years ago, we had another immigration crisis in 2020, and we had one in 2016, and we had one in 2014. Like, you just keep going back.
And in Europe, anytime an election pops up, all of a sudden they got immigration crisis. It's like immigrants must know that it's time to move during an election. That just that's the only explanation for it.
Pretty much. And the thing is,
I'm being facetious, by the way, people. I'm being facetious.
Exactly. But that's kind of the point, is like, if you see it, it's like, at the core, these folks understand that white fear of brown people is a great driver in politics. And that was but what ends up happening is you have this constant process of a solution in search of a problem instead of a problem in search of a solution. So you have, I need to get elected. I need to show that I have worth. Who can I demonize? Who can I scapegoat? And then say, I will be the one to actually solve this problem.
Yeah.
That's the
I want to talk about that tactic too, because I think and I don't want to switch subjects quite yet. I just want to say this so we can remind each other, because I find myself pointing that pattern out, particularly around trans issues and gender right now, right? It's like conservatives, the right, Republican have said like this is a problem. Like women in sports are being dominated by men who just can't compete with other men and they're taking over. And it's like, what, where, when, what are you talking about? And folks just like clung like, oh yeah, that would be terrible. And now we're not talking about the murder rate, the suicide rate, or the lack of access to healthcare, which every trans person that I know cares infinitely more about than if they get to compete in a volleyball game and against who, right? And so it's like on so many levels, there's this idea, or it feels like the right has paid attention to the playbook and they keep going. They're like, hey, this strategy works. We're going to implement it, right? Same mechanisms, different details. And the left is stuck constantly responding to things, and we don't even have the appropriate language or framework to respond to it with, right? Which is why I don't want to go too much. I want to come back to that about trans, but and I think the thing is, and I want you to talk about this because your work is around whiteness. It's our inability to name whiteness and capitalism as foundationally eroding our entire understanding of how we relate to each other, right? And so the left actually can't respond in a way that's proactive because it indicts so much of their own foundation, of our own foundation.
Of course. Well, I mean, the simplest example of that is in Congress, where you have unlimited money just flowing through, and you basically can. I mean, Elon Musk is a great example of that. You can just buy Congress, buy people, buy a presidency, and so what does that mean? It means it really limits the parameters of the debate. It's because again, you're not going to be sitting there questioning corporate overlords if that's the hand feeds you, because all these idealism of I'm going to only accept grassroots money and no corporate campaign, all this stuff. Well, you know what? Those folks, they don't get elected because it takes money,
right?
But then at the same time, like you said, we really need to be honest that whiteness in and of itself is so endemic in both parties. It's just exacerbated by the right. That it's a lot easier for like during the summer of racial reckoning for Nancy Pelosi to wear the kente cloth and take a knee and do all this stuff. It's so much performative without actual substantive, and that's the biggest issue right there. And it's one of those things that we have to be willing to say, like, look, and unfortunately, what ends up happening. And this is where it gets really complicated. This is where with electoral politics, I love the absolutism of my beautiful grassroots people, but there is something about that navigation in the sense that, like, I love it when, Democratic leaders actually try to open up some space. But unfortunately, whenever they apologize, whenever they do this stuff, then all of a sudden the right's like, see, they're weak. And that's the biggest thing is that's the narrative right there. And so we're in this weird cycle where folks are just they're weak, but unfortunately, what that does mean is that there are some progressive voices within the Democratic Party. I mean, the obvious ones right now are AOC and Bernie Sanders doing their oligarchy tour. But you have Jayapol, you have all these folks who are in the squad.
Jasmine Crockett is making some noise, right?
She totally
and
is.
It's funny to me that she's not considered part of the squad.
Yeah, I don't quite get that part exactly.
Yeah.
But the point being that but the overall point is that this is what I always find funny with the Democrats is that if you look, and I'm talking like over about almost close to a 30-year arc. Every time you put forth a presidential nominee, it's always this is the most left-wing, radical, reactionary. And you hear the rhetoric all the time right now, right? Like when you hear it, whenever someone, a centrist judge rules against Trump, it's it's a left-wing activist judge and all this stuff. It's very much always they're socialists, they're leftists, they're all these different things. And I keep saying, like, unfortunately, the Democratic playbook has always been. No. Don't think of me like that. Don't think of me like that. So you had like Obama being the deporter in chief. Well, they're going to say that I'm weak on immigration, so I'm going to go really hard on immigration. You know what? He went hard on immigration. and they still call them soft. So it's like, if they're going to call you a socialist, then that's your
Right.
opening. Lead into it.
And I mean, like, yeah. And I don't mean to cut you off, but this is one. It kills me, and I don't want to get because I'll go on a tangent on this, but it's like Cory Booker. I actually went on a tangent on this on one of the shows that week where his little marathon speech, and it's like, okay, cool. You did it when literally nothing was on the line. And you know what I mean? Like, you didn't stop any legislation. You didn't stop any nominations. You didn't do anything. I can appreciate the stamina and I can appreciate some part of it. But then later that week, you vote to send arms to Israel.
Israel, exactly.
You know what I mean? And like, and it's like, where Kamala Harris is an anti-Semite and a supporter of Hamas, even though she never once indicated that she was ever going to care about Palestinian people.
Exactly. Well, and also she's married to a Jewish dude. Like, I know that's not like the token. Like, I know that's a cheap argument because you say, well, I'm married to a black woman and therefore I'm not racist. But it's like
it doesn't automatically disqualify you, but it's like, yeah.
But at the same time, it's one of those things that's kind of the overall point, is that no matter what happens, like, truth and facts do not matter to the conservative right now. MAGA Republicans are a priori right in what they do and what they say. And actually, that's why Jimmy Carter left the Southern Baptists way back in the day, because he said that they were so convinced that they had the truest interpretation of God available to them. But then the problem is, if they were wrong, then God was wrong. Ergo, I can't be wrong. And they ironically turned themselves into deities, which is the ideology that we're feeling right now. There's nothing, like, if you watch, cable news and the talking heads, there's literally nothing that a MAGA Republican can do or say that's wrong. They will never admit to that. It's always that Trump is the best, everything is great, everything sucks under liberalism, everything's awesome under conservatism, and all of your problems will be solved if we take control of them right now. And that is not a political ideology. That's not Reagan and Tip O'Neill going at it. This is right out of the
that's fascism. It's 100% fascism. Yeah,
absolutely.
We're getting a question that I think picks up on this thread, and it's actually a two-part. He said, "Are y'all scared what could happen to you with the current administration over policing on freedom of speech?" I would love to hear your thoughts on this. I have some. Say more, brother.
So, well, I mean, I there's a difference for me between fear and caution, and for me, I have it's one of these things that, and actually I'm pulling up a quote because it's said a lot better here. Okay, so for me, I shouldn't just say offhanded, "No, I'm not afraid," because that in all honesty, that's me enacting some macho BS. So let's back up. I was being a smart aleck, and let me try this again.
I appreciate the reflection.
Yes, I do have a lot of fear about this. Okay, but I also, what concerns me a lot, and inside these closed door meetings where people are trying to not put themselves at risk, I'm like, we have to put ourselves at risk right now. Like, this is the time. If there's any time to do it, right now is the time. That they said, well, this will kind of pass and this will pass. No, this is, if we let this. I mean, I'm on sabbatical right now. I shouldn't be doing involvement on campus and all this stuff. Focusing on taking this turn in my career. If I did that, there wouldn't be a university to come back to. So this is the time to do it.
It's that real, huh?
It is. Well, I mean, when you have the, I mean, what is it? Harvard's getting threatened with $9 billion, and that's huge. And yes, Harvard can take it. But for a lot of the other institutions, and they're doing some amazing work. I know that the higher ed has a lot of issues. I'm a higher ed scholar. I'm painfully aware of it. But at the same time, it would be basic things about cancer research and trying to figure out ways to make, malaria prevention expandable, getting clean drinking water to people. Like, these are core things that folks are doing under the liberal leftist academy. But one of the things that I wanted to drop this here real quick is that I love coming back to Audre Lorde's A Litany for Survival, because she said, when we speak, we're afraid that our words will not be heard nor welcome. But when we're silent, we're still afraid. So it's better to speak, remembering we were never meant to survive. And I love that because in a weird way, it's free because it acknowledges that we're not. I mean, literally, the right says liberalism is a disease that has to be destroyed. We are not meant to survive this. This is not, you don't bend the knee and all of a sudden everything goes away. Well, actually, for my Game of Thrones heads, like the first Stark bent the knee and he got his head chopped off. That's the fallacy of what we're talking about here. So what I love about Audre Lorde, though, is she acknowledges that the fear is there. We're going to be afraid. But you know what? When we're quiet, we're still afraid. Right. And we're still and so with all of that, this is the fight that we're in, and then it also comes back to that famous Frederick Douglass quote, because everyone knows if there's no struggle, there is no progress. But what people forget is in that same paragraph, he said, find what a people will quietly submit to, and you will find the exact measure of injustice that will be wrought upon them. Now, does that blame us for that injustice? No, but it says, if we're quiet on this, that is exactly the level of what's going to be brought upon us. Right. So speak up, and at least we go down fighting, because we weren't meant to survive. That's the core of it. Yeah. When they talk about the enemy within, we are the enemy within. We are seen. Absolutely, because you have to have an. You can't be a hero if you don't have an enemy.
That part. Who said that? That's an Audre Lorde quote, Anthony. That's an Audre Lorde quote. That brings me to something I've been talking to everybody I can about. It seems like everybody's talking about it in some really frustrating ways to me, though. I would love to hear your thoughts. Kilmar Abrego Garcia, right? And obviously not just him. There's Khalil and the young brother that was just taken at that, and the young lady.
Exactly, all the way around.
But, and Kilmar Abrego Garcia is not like, because man, let me bring it up. Who's the rep that just and of course my keyboard is frozen. The rep just went down there, right? And just say and they won't let him be.
And they said no. Yeah, exactly. And if you also saw, the congressional Republicans told the congressional Democrats. So the MAGA crew went down and said, "Oh, look at how beautiful this jail is." And then
they were doing photo shoots out there.
Exactly. And then the Dems said, "Okay, it's our turn to go down." And said, "No, if you're going to go down there, you're going down on your own dime." And then they also are working with the dictatorial government of El Salvador to say, "No, do not let anybody in. This is your." Even though we're funding it, even though we're paying $6 million to house these folks, that this is your autonomous space, so don't let anybody in who's not us, right?
Right.
And so
what do we do? So here's what I'm struggling with, or like what I'd love to hear you have us talk through a little bit is, it doesn't seem like we are quietly submitting to that. Right? Like you have at least some level of outrage of like, yo, the Supreme Court with Clarence Thomas on it, with Alito, with all it is like 9-0. Like I don't know that I can think of another decision that has been unanimous on this court, right? And yet here we are. We don't know if that man's alive. We don't know, you know what I mean? We got openly talking about and contemplating, are we going to send citizens to El Salvador? Like homegrown? You know what I'm saying? Like these things, and we're talking about, we're not even, with no shame, discussing private prisons, right? Like, and not even connecting like, yo, if you have a private prison, that means you need a supply. There's a demand for a supply of criminals now.
Exactly. Again, a
right?
Like, a problem. Exactly.
Yeah. So what are we to do when it's like, hey, we're not being quiet? Even the legacy media, even CNN is like, hey, and they fired Mark Lamont Hill for speaking at the UN, not even on CNN. Exactly. He didn't say shit on CNN. And they like go to him, and even they're like, hey, Jake Tapper is on there like this don't feel right. What like where we at, bro? What's going on?
So let me back up. So let's not misinterpret Audre Lorde's or Frederick Douglass's prophetic words. Okay, it doesn't mean that if we are loud, that therefore it will stop. They're still going to come at us. It just is that it's sort of that legal concept of but for us speaking out. How many more would be deported right now? How many more citizens would have been picked up?
That's a great point.
And so I think that's actually kind of the power of what we have to do. The problem is that we're seeing things as stopping the negative instead of the positive, which is really hard. Like that's really where we're at right now. And what for me is really troubling is that, I mean, this is again talking about a consistent playbook. This is straight out of McCarthyism. You just label someone. All you have to do is label someone as a horrible person, right? And then whatever comes to them it's justified. So, he's an MS-13 gang member, and I saw a whole thing back and forth, the press secretary, and they're like, where's the evidence that he's a gang member? And that shouldn't even be enough to deport someone. Like, you need to show that they're actually doing something bad. Like they have,
right.
Because again, but that's actually, this gets back to that notion of whiteness, because as the departed comedian Paul Mooney said, it's the complexion of the protection for the collection. And when you're sitting there with the complexion of protection, you constantly think that won't happen to me. And then you saw the allure of whiteness happen to say, like Latinos for Trump. Oh no, if I just align myself, if I have kind of this proximity to whiteness, that won't happen to me. And these cats are having buyer's remorse left, right, and center. They're like, forget about your 401k. My family is getting separated because but we were the good ones. We were the ones that were supposed to be protected. Folks forget, if it happens to one, it can happen to anyone. And if we're going to continue down this road, if we're going to say that, like, look, just having, a criminal record and felonies on the record is an excuse to deport even U.S. citizens, I think we should probably start with someone who has 34 felonies on his record and a bunch of allegations.
Listen. And I think that gets, look, you're speaking my language right now too, because well, there's a couple things. One, the need for racial literacy, right? Like it's not a mistake that as authoritarian regimes, as fascism makes a resurgence, one of its primary targets is the education system, especially segments of the education system that are concerned with critical theory, right? Whether that's critical race theory, whether that's critical gender theory, whatever it is, that are concerned with an examination of power and how power operates to shape our society, right? Because eventually that gets to the bag, right? Like I don't think you don't engage critical theory without realizing, hey, capitalism's kind of at the heart of all of this. And I'm not dismissing gender and any of that, right? Obviously not. But my point is that the absence of that racial literacy allows for that Venezuelan sister who was screaming and yelling for Mr. Trump to genuinely, and I do believe she was genuinely shook when TPS status got revoked, right? I think there are folks that I've talked to, Latinx folks, and black folks and white folks and poor folks and all that, who are like, yo, I really thought he said he was coming for criminals, right? Yeah, exactly. And so like the frame of whiteness, of understanding where this is coming from, and that when Stephen Miller says criminals, he's talking about brown people, period.
Exactly.
He's talking about white people who don't align with his understanding of a white world order. Exactly. And so there's that need, and then the thing I wanted to loop back to is how it's actually so that need, I guess, just like speak to that a little bit. Like, what does it do for us to be aware of how those operate and understanding that Whiteness, they're only talking about them.
Yeah. So I think that Public Enemy said it really well back in the late 80s, early 90s, where they had their album Fear of a Black Planet.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things is that if one of the things that's the most tried and true is that if you can engender fear in people, you can get them to do almost anything. I saw a young brother in the chat talking about, post 9/11. Yeah, exactly. There was an amazing analysis done by Georgetown University professor Cole. God, what is his first name? Professor Cole, we'll call him that. But because he looked at the Muslim registry and all this stuff, and he made the argument that we're less free, less safe. You round up these cats, you get them in the registry. It gets back to my earlier point that there are actually horrible elements in society. 9/11 was a horrible thing, but do you really want to cut off your intel in that community and create fear? Because really, that's what they did. And they actually, in a weird way, kind of invite more of that because it creates this lawless space. But the point is that if you can make folks afraid of, it's not, because again, the fear, it's completely irrational. It's not just that migrants are coming across the border, right? It's that, Juan is coming to your area specifically, and he wants to break into your house and rape your wife and take your Ford Escort, and just, it's about you. And it doesn't matter that you're in Lincoln, Nebraska, or Columbus, Ohio. He wants to do you and your family wrong. We saw that all the way back in the day with the this is really dating probably both of us, but when George Bush the first one ran on the Willie Horton, right? And it wasn't just that Willie Horton was right. You have a black guy, and it was it was just, oh my God, this guy could get out of jail and he could come after me. But it becomes an indictment because we don't check our whiteness, because we don't understand how whiteness clouds our judgment, and it leads to fear that all of a sudden we end up with a situation where folks have these completely irrational things. It goes back, though, it cuts across race because it goes to gender as well. When you're talking about the trans athletes, right? There was a rep from the NCAA testifying, and if I remember correctly, it'll be a little off, right? But just it was like there's something like 510,000 student athletes in the NCAA, and there's like 10 who are trans.
Yep.
There are more bills on the books about NCAA athletes who are trans than there are actually trans athletes, right? And this is why what's horrible about this is that fundamentally fear makes us stupid. And actually, who had a great rumination on that was Tommy Lee Jones in Men in Black, because he was talking to Will Smith at the beginning of the movie. Yeah, be careful how you talk about Will Smith. Exactly. But
it's a fact that he was in that movie talking to Tommy Lee Jones.
Exactly. And he said, well, why don't you just tell people about, this alien, the aliens who are everywhere, right? People are smart. He said, and Tommy Lee Jones, and this is a great way of breaking down. He said, no, a person is smart. People are fearful, dumb, reactionary animals. And this is what this right-wing populism feeds into, is exactly that issue. That I can sit there and testify till the cows come home that I live on the U.S.-Mexico border. Like, I'm down there. I can tell you exactly how things have changed over the last 3 years, but it doesn't matter because you've got knuckleheads like Sean Hannity every day saying we're being invaded by these cockroaches coming across the border. And no amount of rationality breaks into that because people are afraid. And that's a really scary thing to do, because when people are afraid, we do stupid things. Like, remember back post 9/11, you had people, oh my God, there could be a chemical attack, and I'm gonna duct tape every vent in my house. Oh shoot, now there's no air circulating, I'm gonna suffocate. It's like, bro, you got to use your head. You got to get, what do they call it in psychology? You got to get out of your lizard brain, where you're not just reacting. You need to think. And unfortunately, when Trump says, I am, when he goes off on he's so smart and he's the smartest guy ever, the cult of MAGA just believes him, and they don't actually,
Let's talk about that a little bit. And I remember what I was going to say, and you touched on it brilliantly, because I think this is also part of, we're going to get a little sophisticated here. Maybe we'll do a separate one that we can get into, but one of the key mechanisms of whiteness, I would argue, is maintaining a certain material relationship between workers and property and capital and what Marx might call the proletariat. Would call the proletariat, where the laws and crime are always more set up to keep to keep property intact, to keep access to material resources intact, and then at the same time highlighted, exaggerated, made spectacle to keep that fear present, so that people don't understand the difference between crime and harm, right? Mm-hmm. And at the same, so we have people out here causing harm all the time. Some of that is illegal, some of that is not, but it all, and then what we have is a whole class of people, police officers in this group, but not just that, because they're the leading edge of enforcing this, but rhetorically the middle class does this, right, of saying like, well, they're illegal, or these are criminals and therefore disposable, right? They're a threat. But really all they are is the boundary between capital and the proletariat. Because if we cared about crime as most people understand it, as something bad happening, we would never, like, 34 felonies would be disqualifying.
Exactly.
Wage theft would be disqualifying. Police would be at a CEO's door as quick as they would be at the door of the dude with the little bit of plants in their pocket at the on the corner. But we don't see that, right? But we see Law and Order, right? And we see the sensationalized stories about gangsters and terrorists and crime, and that allows somebody like Trump to literally, when he's talking about sending American citizens to Secot in El Salvador, he's saying, we got real bad ones who beat grandmas over the head with bats and who are doing this, and it's like, where is that happening?
Yeah,
like where is that endemic? Where is that happening? You know what is endemic and what is costing lives? Lack of health care. Right? That is what's killing more people than what you're talking about.
Absolutely. But again, that's the weird thing about the way that we perceive things, is that it's so individualized. And that's why, if I'm a CEO of a health company and I say, okay, we're not going to pay anymore for a full amount of anesthesia for you to have a major surgery. So necessarily, right, I'm taking you from the black to the red, just like that, right? So now your family is struggling, can't keep the lights on, can't eat, can't do all these things. That's just capitalism, business as usual. But if, one cat takes another cat out on the street, that's a crime. But you have, like you said, you have the exact same, you actually have death on a larger magnitude than just this one-to-one criminality. But if it's under the guise of capitalism, if it's under the guise of whiteness, that it doesn't make a difference. You saw a similar thing happen with there was that Marine who put an unhoused performer in New York City in a chokehold, and
Daniel Penny.
literally choked the brother out and killed him. But again, because it's a noble endeavor vis-a-vis whiteness, right? No, a cat is dead, a dude is dead. But when you can label them as, when you can say he's homeless, he was a nuisance, he loses his humanity. That's where actually the power of words comes in. You actually asked a really, really complicated question. I'm going to start uber nerding out on you, but if you need me to move to a different space,
no. Uber, look, we're here, bro.
All right. So, but that intersection of whiteness and capital was foundational to the creation of whiteness in the first place. That is
absolutely,
like Theodore Allen, the renowned departed historian, made in the 90s. He made one of the most profound statements, and it still resonates to this day, that when European colonizers came to Turtle Island back, in the 14 to 1500s, there was not a concept of whiteness. Now,
Absolutely
don't get me
right.
wrong.
There wasn't a concept of whiteness in Europe, neither.
Yeah, exactly. Now, Nell Irving Painters has shown really clearly that there were these kind of hierarchies where people basically, it was to condense a 500-page book into a little sound bite.
It's a great book. Y'all should check that out. The History of White People is a fantastic book. Check it out.
Amazing book. But basically, it was the Anglo-Saxons and the Germans trying to prove that they were the better person, and they would create these hierarchies within Europe. But what they didn't have associated with it was an oppressive structure that allowed them to that allowed them to really exploit people. Really, what they did, the people who it did, especially the British were allowed to exploit were the Irish within their kingdom. But they hated each other across these cultural barriers. But they didn't have the power to oppress in the way that, for example, colonization vis-a-vis indigenous genocide, shadow slavery, all these different things. Right. We didn't have those mechanisms in place. But there was a watershed moment in the early 1700s where you actually had a group of freed blacks and low-income people who would later become white defying the governor of Virginia, because they wanted land in the West. They were gonna go take it, and the governor said, "Don't." Exactly, and you had, and so they defied the power elite, and that shook people up, because it's a really simple math problem. There's 10 of us and 4,000 of them, And so what you started seeing over the course of the next century and a half was this articulation of whiteness. And you actually saw it retrospectively analyzed by the esteemed sociologist W.B. Du Bois, where he said post-Reconstruction that white people had this public and psychological wage of whiteness. And they would cling to that so fiercely, where they would say, look, I may not be rich, I may be really struggling, but at least I'm not black. At least I'm not an Indian. Right. At least I'm not right. And through that articulation, it does two things. It normalizes capitalist oppressive relationships, and it normalizes white supremacy at the same time. And the two rely on each other in a really inextricably intertwined way. Those two things have to rely on each other, and it relates to the material conditions on the ground level. And ironically, a lot of these sort of critical race Marxist scholars, they make the argument, which I'm convinced by, that if the working class could work through its whiteness, it would form more class-based solidarity in the process. But instead, you have low-income white people who are saying that my enemy is that immigrant coming across the border, that my enemy is some mythical guy named Tyrone who really wants my wife specifically and who will break into my house to get her. Again, all in the white imagination. It's not real. Right. But when I'm convinced that he's my enemy because I have internalized racism and not seeing the capitalist exploiters as my enemy, it has these mutually reinforcing ideas where you end up with capitalism and white supremacy feeding off of each other in that way. And it leads to both class-based and race-based exploitation.
Yeah, and I mean, my work, we talked a little bit about my work, when we, as white folks, by we, I'm saying white folks now, understand that original wound of whiteness, right? The way that wage, what it cost us, right? What did we give up in exchange for that wage of whiteness, which is all the things that actually make us human, right? It was, we're enforcing the Fugitive Slave Act, that's how my people, Irish folks, became white, was through the enforcement of the Fugitive Slave Act and acting as a first police force. That actually cost us something, and that those wages actually are worthless at this point in time, right? And if there's anything that we should be able to see very clearly from a Trump administration, it's that, right? And I mean, we talked about Nell Irving Painter's work. think about Dying of Whiteness by Jonathan Metzl, The Sum of Us by Heather McGhee, right? Where there's so many empirical studies and moments where we are clearly presented with facts about what racism is costing us, what whiteness is costing us as human beings, and it's not connecting, right? And that I have, my book is coming out where I talk about why I think it's not connecting.
There we go.
But yeah, like that's the thing, and the last thing I'll say to that, and then I want to pivot a little bit if you still got some time.
Sure. I got you.
I want to talk about masculinity and the way that Trump and that is playing into it too.
Absolutely.
But the last thing I will say about this way that class and whiteness, capitalism and whiteness are reifying and are working together. My frustration with our inability to name that is I'm watching in real time Bernie Sanders and AOC out here doing good work, drawing tens of thousands of people in districts that we would never think that message is drawing tens of thousands of people in. And there are two things happening. And I think they're both true. And I think they're both problematic. The first is I think that they being Bernie Sanders and his campaign, can and should name the role of race and whiteness more explicitly, right? I think the idea that they're class essentialists should be taken seriously, right? And I see a lot of folks ignore that is actually the most diverse political party. Bernie Sanders got the most, when he was running against Clinton, got the most black support, right? Like their disconnect, or the way that they're like, well, he's not even a Democrat, he's not that, as if Democrats don't wield whiteness in just as lethal a way as Republicans do.
I'll pause you right there. Okay.
Maybe not just as lethal.
Yeah, there we go. That's it right there.
Yeah.
Because we don't let them off the hook, but there's
a difference for sure. There's a difference.
Yeah. And I'm sorry, it's one of those things that I've been in too many progressive conversations where it just homogenizes everything, and I'm like, we cannot.
No, we can't. I'm with you. I'm with you.
Yeah, exactly. Keep going.
So, okay, I guess I'm saying he did lose the South to Hillary. He didn't lose. He didn't lose the popular vote in any place in 2016. He did not lose the popular vote. He should have been the Democratic nominee, and it was Amy Klobuchar and moderate Democrats who did not have a chance of winning the nomination that consolidated power behind Biden or behind Clinton to win.
Yeah, exactly.
Anyway, my point is, I think that those two things, right? I think we need to tell the truth about both of those things. Yes, there's an absence of a critical race analysis in that, right? The idea that it's just fighting oligarchs and that Elon Musk wasn't a son of apartheid, that part is missing from how they can mobilize support.
Exactly. Right? And one of the difficulties, and I will say this in terms of messaging, and I even see this at like rallies that I go to, that because we believe in intersectionality, sometimes the message gets diffused too greatly at the grassroots level, And so I understand on their level that you need something very centered and focused in that way, right? And so they're not able to, and again, I'm not trying to let them off the hook, but I'm saying that the Democratic establishment is really where, because we can't make heads of this. One of the things I struggle with is we'll then have like one little group of progressive folks try to be the voice of everybody, and then we hold their feet to the fire, when in fact it should have been the entire Democratic establishment, because they did a self-study right after the last election. And one of the very first things that they came to the conclusion about was that we pushed identity politics too much. Woke is dead. DEI is dead. All this stuff is basically off of our platform. And Jon Stewart, of all people, who's still a centrist liberal, is like he and the Daily Show crew, and they've done this a lot. They went back and looked at the tapes, because there is tapes there, right? Where is the wokeness when you have Kamala talking about her Glock and I will shoot you if you come into my house, and with Liz Cheney And with like they didn't have a single Palestinian speaker at the Democratic National Convention, but yet they had multiple people who were like, well, it was like they tried to keep playing to the center and the right, and saying like, hey, I used to be a Republican, but now I'm a Democrat because they're getting so crazy. There was nothing about identity politics, wokeness, any of that stuff in the platform, and yet they say, oh, well, it was really because of race that we lost. You see that every week on Bill Maher's show. You see it all
absolutely,
and so they blame us. Yeah, they kicked us out of the platform and then blamed us for losing. It was like, no,
it's infuriating, especially when the reality is I would argue that if Democrats expressly embrace those things, similar to what we were talking about, if they didn't just stay silent anyway, that's not going to save you. White men still didn't turn out and vote for Kamala. White men haven't voted for Democrats. Democrats haven't won a majority of white male vote since they've switched since being the conservative party. And
and take it one step deeper than this, okay? Because this one really pisses me off because they keep saying like, well, it was the drop in the percentage of Hispanics that were voting for the Democrats, and there's this narrative about the movement from Democrat to Republican and they'll even say, well, black men started voting for all this stuff. One of the things that this leaves out, and this drives me nuts because it's basic division. When you have a percentage, you have a denominator and a numerator. And so this is very basic math. The folks keep assuming that the numerator stayed the same, and it didn't.
Right. It absolutely did not.
Because again, I'm going to mess up the numbers a little bit because I'm doing it off the top of my head. But Biden he pulled something like 81 million votes, and Trump was about 75. Somewhere in there. It was like 6, 7. So that you got like 156 million, 100 somewhere votes. You had like 4 million fewer people voting this time around. And so you say, well, is that really coming from MAGA? Is that really this energized base? Or are they the ones not turning out? Of course not. You saw the drop in the absolute numbers of people who were voting in the Democrats. So what that means is that it's not that you had here are Hispanic men. And I'm using that because that's what they call them.
Yeah.
I hate that term, but you had Hispanic men, and all of a sudden, because this number dropped in Dems and then went up for MAGA, that there was a migration. Well, no. If they just didn't turn out to vote, you end up there's not a migration to the right. It's just saying you didn't speak to my issue, so I'm not voting for you. And that explains more of this, because then what you end up having is, what's wrong with brown communities? What's wrong with black communities? And what we don't ask in that whole calculation is, what's wrong with white communities? Then they keep going back to Trump.
That part.
It's the complexion of protection for the collection. Paul Mooney.
There you go. And what we don't ask is, what about, even in all that math, the majority of that is people who didn't vote in the first place ever, that have never seen themselves reflected in our electoral system. And why are we pandering to this small group that may or may not switch, when the reality is, if you stand on your values and integrity and on your principles, you're going to engage much more of the population.
Exactly. I mean, what is it? Like 36% of the eligible population didn't vote in the last election, and that's like the high turnout. So this isn't even a popular mandate. It's saying you had a third of the population, and from that you're going to engage in a fascist regime. There's no mandate.
That's wild. Yeah, that's wild.
So speaking of mandates, you wanted to talk about.
Yeah, I was going to say, let's talk about mandates and fascist regimes. And there's so many to talk about. That I've thought about. You said something. You mentioned Miles Horton and this idea, the fear of a black planet, and all that, and the way whiteness bogs our mind, where we'll be afraid of Miles Horton coming into our house and doing whatever.
Or Willie Horton.
Miles Horton. Yeah, no, that's not. Yeah. No, don't get those Willie Horton. Oh, Miles Horton. I would vote. Miles Horton. I would vote for him. he would never run, but I would have voted for him.
Yeah.
Will be afraid of Willie Horton while voting for a man that would do exactly the same, like openly tells us he will do these things to people that we love, that we live with in community with, and all that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then there's the idea, and that's all about power, right? Like, I don't think you can listen to let's take the Access Hollywood tapes from his first election, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't think you can hear that and not hear somebody who's obsessed with power and control and dominance. But if you can, I don't think you can then hear him talk about invading Canada, invading Panama, taking over Greenland, and not hear somebody obsessed with a narrative of masculinity and dominance and control. I certainly don't think you can hear the way he speaks about Palestinians and Gaza and not hear these things. Mm-hmm. But even if you can do all that, he got up just last week. I think it was last week. It might have been earlier this week. And at some conservative conference after the tariffs, talking about these national leaders are lining up and kissing my ass. And Mr. Please, will you do this? And Mr. Please, like, I don't know, what is it about? When will men see that? I even think about some of the my own toxic masculinity. Some of the people who I would argue are processing some of that in my life that I love. At what point is that just sickening to us as men, right? Like, wow, you're like, at some point that's buffoonery, that you're a clown, even if you're that type of dude. Like, tell me what do you make of that?
I think that there is very much an allure, and one of the things that happens is that what Trump does really well is he identifies voids in society. And I'm not saying he does this, like, he's not, mapping out and, thinking about this rationally. It's just the way he is fills these voids and people gravitate towards it. So, like you said, with the whiteness, with the class, with all these different things.
Yeah.
But there is an allure to that, because that is the way that we have historically constructed what it means to be a man, right? And what I will say is that I think that the 1960s did a very good job of sort of destabilizing patriarchy. But the problem is we didn't have as much of a push in terms of what does it mean to be a man. Like, we still need, and I love Bell Hooks' A Will to Change, where she said, here's ways that we can actually do this in a non-patriarchal way, right? And unfortunately, a lot of the material benefits that men receive still push them in this direction, in terms of, basically, the more you act in a toxically masculine way, more, you're more aggressive at getting jobs and getting women, which is basically the two foundations of getting of your and unfortunately,
your value.
Yeah, exactly. And we haven't had sort of this alternative space where we can actually, talk about this, and which is why, someone like Joe Rogan is so alluring to these young men. And I mean, I train in a fight gym. Like, I do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu in a fight gym, and I see these young cats coming up, and they really do see, like, this is still the way that these very antiquated ways of being. They still, unless I can hurt somebody, I'm not the man, right? Unless and I say it intentionally, hurt somebody, because this is not, they're not trying to defend themselves. It's the way that, our national defense budget is really a national offense budget.
Right.
And so, but you see it really, what was interesting was it was so implicitly appealed to maybe 10, 15 years ago. And now it's just really explicit. Like, on Fox News, you've got Jesse Waters every time that a man who's a Democrat comes through. And the consistency, it doesn't matter. But it's like, well, so-and-so drank a milkshake using a straw. That's effeminate. That's not what men do. As if Jesse Waters is like this authority on what masculinity looks like. But unfortunately, there's an allure to that. And unfortunately, on the left, all that we've been able to do is to criticize. Oh, that's toxic. That's patriarchal masculinity. That's toxic masculinity, and it is. Don't get me wrong, but there's a void that's filling. And the young men who are drawn to Trump and to Andrew Tate and to all the, to Joe Rogan, to all these different folks, there is a yearning for that. And actually, what's interesting is once I start talking, and I had this training, it's the simplest thing in the world because it's not really my area. But you just ask these kids, how have you hurt yourself? Or how have you been hurt trying to be more masculine? And how have you hurt other people by trying to be more masculine? And they start breaking those two things down. I'm like, God dang it. And but again, we have to be able to offer them ways that are more productive and healthy. Because one of the things that really hurts, especially when you took gender and race on top of it, in social psychology, there's this concept called John Henryism. So John Henry was the old sorry, giving context and all this stuff, but he was
no,
the
come on,
yeah. So he was the biggest, baddest railroad man who was out there, and they would break the rocks to let the railroad go, to build the tracks so the railroad could go through. There was a machine that could do the work better than the railroad workers could. So he challenged the machine to a race, and so it went boom, 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 and the dude won, and then he died.
His heart blows up or something like that, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, he pushed himself so hard he died. And in social psychology, they found this amongst, in particular, black men, but it applies in other ways. That you push so hard. What's that masculinist way? I got to grind so hard. I got to go, and then all of a sudden, you literally all the negative outcomes of masculinity become manifest in your body. And literally, the guys die from masculinity.
That's crazy.
And so, in a weird way, we have to be able to say, these are authentic ways of being men. And I've seen it more on a local level in really powerful ways. Because then we have to, as men, have to be very attuned to the harm that we've done both to the women in our lives as well as the LGBTQIA communities. Because, if you're sitting there masculine policing another dude saying, oh, that's so gay, it's not just a horrible thing to say to another dude, but then if there's a queer kid right there, what's the message that you're telling them in the process? You're doing harm on so many levels,
man. And I think about the harm that, especially I grew up, we talked about this a little bit. I was an athlete growing up, and I think about the locker room culture in the spaces that I through high school, through college, two sports for the majority of that, football and baseball. And I'm like, man, I even think our coach called one of the players like Rainbow.
Yeah.
What was like his nickname because he was suspected of being queer, and it's like, man,
yeah.
Just the number of ways that is, and I love how you brought it back to, because I have felt this certainly to be true for myself, and I think for a lot of the young people I've talked to, where, okay, cool, I'm to a place where I can accept that there's toxic masculinity. I might even be able to name some of the traits or the way that I show up that are harmful, that one might say that. But there's a really distinct absence of what do I do? What does positive masculinity look like?
Exactly.
Right?
And that's why.
How do I tell my boy, hey, I love you, without having him look at me like, bro, are you, what's going on?
Pause.
No
homo. Exactly. It's all that stuff anyway. And again, that's where, but that's the beautiful thing about it is that there is no such thing as a complete form of oppression. That is, there's always cracks. There's cracks in the walls of whiteness. There's cracks in the walls of capitalism. There's cracks in the walls of masculinities. And with that, that's opportunity. And that's the thing is, if we want to, this is too simplistic, but if we want to start valuing other things, right? If we want to, value a man for being a good father, and I don't just mean like that really low standard where they're like, oh, well, I babysit my kid. No, that's like, first of all, you can't babysit.
If you got to use babysit, if you're talking about your kids, you're not doing it right.
I'm aware. I actually just saw Kevin Hart do that in a comedy special. It's like, kidding me. But but the point being that actually doing it in a way that shows care, affection, meets the material needs of the kid, is engaged, is reading with them, doing all the stuff that we have the power to value these different things.
Yeah.
And that is powerful in and of itself, because then we start making conscientious decisions about what do we want to value, what do we want to devalue. Because at the same time, I think it's very necessary, and I haven't seen this happen nearly enough. I think it's actually very necessary to just blow up the masculinity that Trump has, and not trying to say masculinity is whole, but to show the facade of his work. Because it becomes sort of like this bone spurs, ha 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 ha. What people don't talk about is how much Trump being in the WWE led to him really amplifying his male bravado. And the thing is,
absolutely,
the guy cannot fight his way out of a paper bag.
He's never crushed a grape. Like, this dude has never thrown hands a day in his life. I promise you.
No, he can't. He can't, and he's so sensitive. He can't even. Look, I'm 5'8", 220. There's no way that cat only weighs 228. I'm sorry, like there's no way. But he's so sensitive about this, and why don't folks go more direct at that? He sits there. I mean, really, talk about the opposite of what a man should do. He went to Parents' Weekend with Don Jr. Well, first of all, he didn't want to name Don Jr. because what if he's a loser? What if he has my name and he's a loser? It's like, oh my God, that's just a horrible parent. Then he goes to college, parents' night. He slapped his son in front of his friends.
Yeah.
And knowing that kid would not hit him back. Right. Because he knows
he would never do that to anybody who would hit him back.
He would never he would never slap Andrew Tate, because Andrew Tate, and I can't stand that fool, but he would put him down if he put hands on him.
Absolutely.
Like that, you know what I mean?
Absolutely.
And so all these guys, he keeps having this bravado, like, I'm tough. He is the absolute opposite. Like, if you look at the material conditions that he embodies, he is the complete opposite of tough. He's a failed businessman. He's a horrible husband. He's so bad at being in any kind of a relationship. He has to pay off a porn star. All of this this isn't like a flawed man. This is a horrible human being. But yet we're holding this up as the epitome of what he's, he's so great.
And so I think that's a good segue to, and then look, I'm looking at the time. Like, let's end with this.
Go for 75, so there we go.
It's so there was a couple things. One is, by his own definitions of masculinity, he fails.
Always,
right? Like, by your own, and I'm not even. I don't subscribe to that definition of masculinity, but even if we accept it up there, you fail on it. Even if on your own terms, you fail.
Yeah, exactly.
But I think it shows how, I want to say, like, thirsty, and I mean that in like that's I'm borrowing from the youth in me right now. I'm leaving it to my classroom, like. We are thirsty. We're yearning. Let's use a yearning. How about for something real, something that we can. And I think it's illuminates how patriarchy and whiteness and all these things. But right now, let's stick with patriarchy. How it serves to disconnect us from the entire human experience.
It totally does.
Right?
It totally
does.
And
we're searching for that connection. We're searching for ways to be fully human, right? And so we get on TV, we say all these things, and we talk about bombing countries, and we talk about this, and then we it's like our whole lived experience doesn't even move the needle on any of the skill sets that would require that. Right.
Exactly.
We talk about excellence, and then we put war plans in a Signal group chat. Right. Yeah, like exactly. This is like what do we talk? you're even failing at your own definition of what this means.
Always, but remember that when it's affirmative action for white people, especially mediocre white men, that we just call it, the way that
Well, that's
things
just
usually
America.
are.
That's
Yeah,
the
it's just
American way,
exactly.
right?
But I do think that there is something interesting because, in all honesty, I really don't care about Pete Hegseth as a person or any of these cats who are part of the administration. But what I
Right.
will say is that, and one of the things that we have to grapple with in progressive spheres is that materially, the issues of isolation are very, very real vis-a-vis patriarchal masculinity. This is and again,
Absolutely.
that that I mean, we are meant to be social beings, and what's horrible is that, and this is where we have to sort of get off of our ideological high horse and say, like, look, like, we focus so much on the harm that incels do in society, which is important. But what we forget, and this is where our critical analysis kind of goes to the wayside, there are structural reasons why they exist in the first place.
Right.
Why they're there. So, sorry, for those who don't know, incels, involuntary celibates, and for your Joe Rogans, it's really simple. Just go out on the jujitsu mat and stop being such a weenie, and if you want a girl, go after all this stuff.
And then hate them if they say no, it's their fault. It's not. It has nothing to do with you.
Yeah, but what if we redefine masculinity instead of saying that the number of women that you sleep with, and I use that instead of whom because it's an objectification of people,
right? Absolutely.
Right? And instead of saying that, like like you said, we take it as a baseline assumption, because the problem with masculinity is, unlike with whiteness, like whiteness is you're either you are or you're not. I know it's not exactly that way, but with masculinity, there's like degrees of it, right? There's sort of more of a hierarchy of the ways in which.
Yeah, absolutely.
And these kids feel that they are less than, right? When in fact you should just be able to say, no, whatever I do, how I present, I am a man, and that's it. And we should be okay with that. And unfortunately, and that's a real tough one, because it's easy for me to theorize and talk about. I've had to deal with it more on a localized level, but to hit it on a systemic level, because really what that leads to is, like you said, that social isolation leads to a lot of social disconnection. And then if I'm hurting, then what, other people should be hurting as well. That, like, if I'm not having my basic needs met, other people should be hurting at the same time. And we haven't cracked that nut, and it's a real tough one, and it's really complicated at this point. But we shouldn't give up on it, and we shouldn't just be, how to say this? I love critical social analysis that goes, whiteness, we need to deconstruct that. Masculinity, we need to deconstruct that. Capitalism, we need to deconstruct that. But that should be the end in and of itself. It shouldn't be this postmodern Foucault, hey, that sucks, that sucks, that sucks, that sucks. It needs to be, what are we going to do in its place? What are we going to do if we're going to create a better society? And that's our charge in what my homie Roberto Cindy Rodriguez would call creation resistance. We are compelled to build in the absence of that in order to forge ahead.
That's a great segue to look. The name of this show is The Antidote. So we're gonna try to move beyond just the critique to the, like, what do we do? And so I want to get there. I want to ask you, what are your things? But I also want to tell folks watching, whether you're on IG or whether you're on YouTube, one, thank you so much for being here. Please make sure you like this, subscribe, check out Nolan on IG, all of that. Also, we are gonna, if it's okay with you, Nolan, I'm gonna invite some questions. We'll take some questions before we jump off. For real, let's have a conversation about, what does it look like? What does the future look like for us? Well, what are the possibilities? Let's do some radical imagining, and then we'll take some questions. We got folks over on IG. We got folks on YouTube as well. So I'm gonna turn it over to you, brother. What do you think, man? What are the moves that get us to a place? I always talk about Grace Lee Boggs. And I'm paraphrasing, and I believe it's her. Somebody correct me if I'm wrong. Shoot me an email or jump in the chat and correct me. But she said the way towards change is not to just deconstruct. It's not to tear down what it currently exists. It's to build an alternative that is so much more attractive that what currently exists becomes obsolete. And I love that model, right? Because again, it's like we can sit and talk about what's wrong and have lots of people have an analysis. Not everybody wants to do the messy work of being in relationship and building something together.
Yeah.
And I think that that's where we're at, right? When we're looking at for me at least, I think about how do I put my relationship over my analysis. So I would love to hear your thoughts. These folks get to hear me every week rail about that.
Well, right now I'm in. Right now, I think that we're in a very reactive stage, and I've actually had to kind of refine my thinking a little bit as it's evolved, because like I think that Grace Lee Boggs' analysis makes a lot of sense in. I think her analysis makes a lot of sense when we're talking about from the 60s to the 90s. That, but once you had sort of the really full-out attack on civil liberties in post 9/11, and then now the full-out. I mean, this has just been a natural progression that the Democrats keep trying to move to the center, and every time they move to the center, then the right just keeps going farther and farther and farther to the right.
Over to window shifts.
Yeah, exactly. And so for right now, for right now, I actually am not in a building space for the precise reason that anything that we're going to be building, anything that gets built is attacked right now and actually crumbles down, because we know that it's so much easier. It's easier to destroy than to create something. And the stuff that, I mean, DEI was never radical revolutionary. This is like the most baseline stuff. And now this is getting eroded. The progress of the last 30, 40 years is getting eroded. For me right now, and this is not satisfying to a lot of my progressive folks, the number one thing that has to happen is really put a dent in MAGA and just and stop the bleeding. Because for me, it's kind of like the difference. Like if you're looking at a human body, I have an accident, I'm in the hospital. I can't get to the healing space. I can't get to the building space if I don't stop the bleeding first. And so for this specific point in time that we're in, we're hemorrhaging. And if I try to focus my attention on building, we're going to bleed out. And I think using a violent metaphor like that.
It's a principle of restorative practices as well. As you got to, before you can start to repair, you got to stop harm from happening.
And now, having said that, I'm a little hypocritical because I've seen, movements on a ground level, protecting students, trying to agitate and saying, don't bend the knee to our universities and don't do this. But everything that we've been saying is very much in the reactionary negative. And I'm a huge critic of that. I believe in, what I said with Seatley, as well as Naomi Klein's No Is Not Enough. I'm down for all of that stuff. And at the same time, for right here, right now, for basically the next, I'd say probably until the midterms in 2027. Is that right? No, 2026. The midterms in 2026. We're in this stopgap mode.
Do you think we have midterms in 2026?
That's a huge question in and of itself.
The fact that that's a legit question is terrifying.
It totally is. It totally is. And it means so many things that shouldn't be on the table are on the table right now. Trump trying to run for a third term, which again, these things they don't play out in both directions, because then folks are like, well, then have Obama run for a third term. And I'm like, please, no. Like, I know that's a pithy retort, but don't do that in practice, because I've heard Democrats actually legitimately float that as an idea, and I'm like, yeah. But that's what I'm saying.
To me, it's so see-through in terms of Trump and my him talking about a third term is only a step towards I'm not leaving. Until I die, I'm not leaving. I don't believe he has any intention of running a campaign again. I think a more likely thing would be declaring a state of emergency and martial law and him not leaving office. Something happened to your audio, brother. Hold on, we're gonna get his audio back, y'all. We're gonna get his audio back. Nope, you're not back. Stay with us. Stay with us. I'm gonna check the Instagram comments. Nope. Hold on. It says that it says you chose to mute yourself. You gotta unmute. Look at this is real life. I told you we didn't. This is not the real raw rugged. Look, that might just be the universe saying, "Hey, it's time to wrap it up." We're gonna bring you back. We'll bring you back. Everybody that I'll holler at you. Nolan, thank you. We'll bring you back for a round 2. Peace and love, my brother. All right. All right, y'all. Hey, thank you so much for rocking with us. We gave you, look, an hour and 25 minutes. That was a conversation with Professor Nolan Cabrera. Make sure you check out his new book, Banned. He's got lots of really dope stuff about whiteness. Just a down dude, making the world a better place every day. And so, yeah, make sure you support. Thank you so much for supporting The Antidote. Make sure you like, make sure you subscribe, share this. Yeah, thank you so much. Get some sleep. Stay looking out for one another. Keep your head on a swivel. All of those things. Peace, peace.